Welcome back, everyone. So, look at this photo. This is kind of happening in games. Yesterday, we talked about The Outer Worlds and its, newer edition being yet another case of a remaster that kind of makes things worse in the visual department.
In some ways, yes.
Yeah, or at least artistically makes things a bit worse. And it's been happening quite a lot because at the same time that was being being talked about in social media, everywhere you see people sharing some of their favorite and also some recent examples of just this continually happening. And it's beginning to turn out that this really is quite a thing that's going on. It seems that for every Resident Evil or maybe the Spyro remake, you do have something where it just goes quite wrong.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of positive stuff around remakes recently, especially because Resident Evil, of course, that looks absolutely stellar. You could trust Capcom any day of the week. Dead Space remake comes out, everyone goes, oh yeah, this is Dead Space, but better. Hell yeah, this is exactly what we wanted to see. There's also Metroid Prime Remastered, which is a perfect example of, hey, we're going to release this game and then it's going to be, it's going to get 10s across the board. Everyone's going to love it and everyone's going to go, oh, that franchise, oh, and then lead into a separate part, which is a perfect business idea. But for everyone who does it right, there's people who do it substantially less right. There's examples like Persona 3 Portable, where everyone's going, well, what? Why have you done this? Where's the FES content?
What happened?
So basically, it's not a great port. In general, it's a little bit lazy on Atlus's behalf, but it's also the fact that there's Persona 3 FES, or FES, which is the PS2 version with additional content. Then there's Persona 3 Portable, which doesn't have the FES content, but has the new female MC route, and a couple of different changes, and a couple of different gameplay changes, I can't remember which one it was, but one of them you can fully control your party members, and the other, it's pure AI for your party members, which results in some awkward stuff, but it's the way the game originally was. So it's a little bit different, and they just went, okay, well, we'll get the one that we can port easily and quick is the portable one because it's the most recent. Go. But not a thought for, should this be the best way to play this game? Should this be the way people play the game? It was very much, how do we get people to buy this? And that's ultimately there. And then you look at Like a Dragonation, where the best way to explain this is it's very much like a Japanese version of The Last of Us Part 1. Because The Last of Us Part 1 remake, and everyone's going, why did you bother doing this? You can just play the game on PS4. You already remastered it. What are you doing here? Why are you charging? Is this just a ploy to get another marketing beat because you're re-releasing it and get a load of money? But Like a Dragonation is a Japanese version of that, where the studio went, okay, this was a 2014 game that we only released in Japan, but now our series is popular in the West, so re-release it quick.
Makes sense.
But it ended up going on PS4 again. So the Japanese are just like, what? I mean, obviously it makes sense, but to them it's still like, what? Hang on, this isn't really remaster, especially because it's actually changed things. So you're like, which version of the game do I play? If you're a Japanese player, you go, well, do I play the one that's the first one or the second one? It's like, well, why have you just played with it for no particular reason?
So they have the same game twice on the same platform.
Obviously, it's on PS5 as well now.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically,
That's
it's
quite funny.
It's like I said, it's the Japanese version of The Last of Us 1. You go, why did you do this? Oh, just to make money? Okay, sure, whatever. And I think obviously then the worst of all is the Outer Worlds Spacer Choice Edition, which is everyone going, oh, this is mostly negative on Steam. Why have you made this look worse? Why does this run worse? This is clearly just a cash grab for a modern platform cash grab, instead of the actual reason remasters exist, which is, here's the game that you all liked very much, but here it is better, or here it is now so people can play it in the way that, God intended in some capacity. And it's just, they never end up doing it correctly, I think. So that's what ends up.
Even for one of them, we look at these from Final Fantasy X.
Oh, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah,
heartbreaking
so the first thing, I heard talk of a CRT filter.
Yes. So you'll see Stella Noxiclair is the one who been kind of on this for a little while, for a long time actually, but recently the tweet got a little bit of traction of, here's the one on the left is Tidus, and he's the old version, very expressive. You can see the furrowed brows, etc. Very nice. And then on the right is the HD remaster, and you go, well, that's a pretty expressionless face, despite being the same frame and the same cutscene. Sure, whatever. And obviously the difference is there's a CRT filter, which doesn't actually change what's there, but it does kind of go, oh, there's a little bit of that brain, a little bit of that, oh yeah, that's Soul, that's back in the day that applied it. But then obviously they then went and showed cutscenes off, and yeah, here's literally here's what's different in cutscenes, here's how this game, despite technically looking better, lost a lot of the artistry, a lot of the expression and facial animations, a lot of the dynamic lighting in scenes, or I shouldn't say dynamic lighting, a lot of the lighting that appeared dynamic in scenes. So there's a thread from Bionic Kappas that goes into this in detail, from like 3 years ago, just playing the whole thing of like, here's the difference in the new version that's better and the old version that I'm playing at the same time that is actually literally better. And so much of it is just like artistic changes that are technically better, but completely destroy the mood of scenes, completely destroy the lighting. Not in any major way, but it's like, oh yeah, I can see when you show it to you, you go, oh yeah, the old one's better. Why did they bother doing this? Why did they ruin what they had? Obviously there's some other improvements gameplay-wise, but the artistry still isn't there. I think that's super clear when you look at the original versus remaster for the Life is Strange. You go, oh yeah, look at that. There's obviously it's a color filter, right? It's just, oh yeah, the scene's kind of pink. Mm-hmm. But it adds so much more to it. And the remaster is just like, nah. What's that? The part that really super, that mattered, the part that takes it to the next level? Nah, it looks better now. It's okay. It's fine.
And it's one of those things where clearly, yes, this stuff has been remade with those assets.
Yep.
But there was, maybe not enough time beyond just executing like that procedure of things to then go in and do all the nice to haves, which are maybe what separates something from, being really good to being like truly great. It's like all those small little details that count. Yeah,
that's the thing. That's the thing that I think is the most important, is these remasters are usually, even when they're not terrible, they're blunt instruments that mean if you say, and this is I think where the principle of the matter is, you go, oh hey, I would like to play critically acclaimed game, except by Edge magazine for some reason, back in the day, Final Fantasy X.
Oh yes.
Okay, sweet. Which version do I play? Well, you play the accessible one, do you? The one that's on Steam. So that's going to be playable forever, theoretically. The one that's on the modern platforms, PS4s, you can get it there. On the Xbox, yeah, go for that. But it's worse than the original version, which means the remaster it does have some upgrades, but kind of on a fundamental level, you haven't replaced emulation, because emulating it's still the best way to go. You've fundamentally failed from the perspective of making something that, from gaming as a culture, not gaming as a business, not gaming as a product, they fundamentally failed because it now doesn't uphold the point of the original. And that's kind of the same thing that happens in Spacer Choice, where it's a little bit more complicated, because if you look at the outdoor scenes, the lighting, technically fantastic. It looks so much nicer.
Yeah, for sure.
It actually does look gorgeous. And then you look at the actual dialogue scenes and go, oh yeah, your dynamic lighting has ruined this. Or it's completely changed the tone of this scene entirely, which is not what the original people were working on it were doing it. They made this shot on the left. They had characters look that way, light that way, because it worked in that context, and now it's different.
It looks so over-sharpened.
Yeah, that's another thing where...
I mean, in both, I know that it's a game itself that it has a little bit of the Fallout. You've obviously Obsidian, but it has
course,
kind of New Vegas vibe of it's almost there, but it's a little bit funky.
Of course.
Yeah, so a weird one. Well, it's exactly what happens when you just go through the process, and maybe you don't have as many artists working in these scenes because do you really need that?
That's the point, no?
Yeah, exactly. If you're just kind of going through implementing technical changes, so it really is quite bizarre, and it's not nice that it keeps on happening. And I think what has happened is certain groups are doing these remasters so good that they have essentially raised the bar. Because I think for a long time, this is what we could have expected, and maybe social media would not have highlighted it as much.
Exactly.
But now, playing Resident Evil 2, there is no comparison.
None.
It's insane. It just feels like, oh, hey, do you want a modern AAA game? Mm-hmm. And I suppose, yes, brackets, there may be one or two older sensibilities here, but basically playing that, if you had have told me that was a brand new survival horror game, I would have completely believed you. Mm. It didn't feel like... It felt like a game that came out the year that it came out that was only just recently made, I suppose, because that really was quite a remake.
Yeah, because that's what it was, basically.
Yeah, remake versus remaster, I suppose, that's the topic here. And I guess remakes have really set the bar so high that now it's quite tricky to be a remaster.
See, I would say one further. I would say it's not remakes versus remasters. It's remakes versus remasters versus demasters. Where these games are actually they're being remastered, but with a very blunt instrument, and not because obviously, if you take all the mastering,
so
exactly,
if you were to take, I'm assuming that at least from as far as I know, that comes from the music, the music industry.
Yeah, you would master a track.
So you look at Mick Gordon mastering the Doom Eternal soundtrack versus somebody who's not Mick Gordon mastering the soundtrack. As an example, we were putting the Pale Beyond soundtrack, we're experimenting putting that onto another medium, and that involved getting somebody who's used to mastering for that medium and like, paying them to do the project, because mastering's really important. It needs to be done by an artist. And I suppose that's the thing. You don't want to just call it up-resed with new lighting, but remastered does imply a degree of retuning and I suppose getting that, getting more of a artistic intent.
Yeah.
I don't want to say quite like a director's cut for a movie, like, a Midsummer or Blade Runner or something, but there is, I think, an expectation that the actual thing itself gets better in more than just a technical way.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem, where remasters have become shorthand for how do we make more money out of just re-releasing this product, more or less. Whereas, like, in so many cases, they'd have been better off from the perspective of the original creators and the perspective of what's better for maybe gaming culture as a whole, especially when it comes to classics being remastered. You go, yeah, well, all you need to do is make this playable. Don't you dare touch it in any other way, because you're just going to ruin it. Which is why I think that example at the very top of this video is like, it's obviously that's an extreme version, but it's a little bit of the same. It's like, yeah, well, if instead of letting that rot, you'd had that enshrined, and it was in glass, it was immune to the elements, and it was actually there for people to see. That's what I think a lot of people in video games in the long term actually want, instead of some, and I don't want to say like amateur attempts to like remaster, because a lot of the time it is actually, they are doing their best, they are technically upgrading it, but it is under the it's like the motive behind it's a problem.
Yeah,
a lot of the time.
Are they afforded the time to polish to get everything right, and also are they afforded the I don't want to say creative chops, but are they afforded the design staff and art staff that a project like that would probably need if it's going to hit or maybe do better with so many of those beats. I think a great example of that actually is in Man. So here's the original shot, and can you see that?
Oh, Judgment, yeah.
Yeah. Like, can you see some fairly obvious, bits where it just can't be as high resolution? Yes. And we go to the new version. I mean, this hair is crispier, but there's definitely ways in which the hair looks worse, even though it is more detailed. You look at the bokeh on the camera, which basically the depth of field, right? The depth of field here is far weaker. Now, obviously, depth of field, that's like what lens you're using in your camera. That there is artistry behind what sort of depth of field you want to do. Like, as an example here, if you're blurring the background out, you're going to have a scene that is like very much focused on his facial reaction to the things that are swirling around him.
Yeah, especially in like an urban environment where you have a lot of lights in the
this
background.
Case,
that'll
the
point
warm
out,
light,
Yep.
right? Like the warm light that's there, whereas you look here, and it's just so much more of a flat scene. I mean, even like. Yeah, it's just flat and lifeless, even though it is maybe more technically correct and higher resolution.
Yeah, we were even talking in the office about how Ocarina of Time, right? If you're maybe the age we are, you probably played Ocarina of Time for the first time in the Nintendo 64 when you were very young, and the re-deads probably traumatized you. They likely scared the ever-loving shit out of you, and rightly so, because they were horrifying, and they were the first things that kind of hit in that game. Same with Majora's Mask being really spooky as like the intent of like the way it actually just worked, because it was dark. And then the 3DS remasters just don't really hit the same. Some of that's for a variety of like cultural reasons and stuff, but a lot of it is like, oh yeah, they made them a little bit more visible, made them a little bit lighter, a little bit clearer to see. So it wasn't that like limitation of, almost in the same way that Silent Hill 2 had the fog because they needed to. And then Silent Hill 2 Remaster didn't have fog because he didn't need the fog anymore. But the fog was the point of the game. The fog was the atmosphere. And so much of it is that just goes away with remasters. And it's like, it's technically the same, but the end user experience, the feeling you get when you play the game, is different.
Oh,
and
dude,
that's, yeah.
you play friggin' Lego Island with that original fog, and it feels like a vast, expansive world. You remove that fog from Lego Island, no, terrible. Even classic World of Warcraft, you know, like the classic WoW scenes, if you play them with the graphic settings of the day, they feel larger and more immersive because of that fog. And obviously the fog was just to, you know, overcome rendering issues that they had back then. But no, man, if you... Okay, so if you go and like you play WoW Classic totally maxed, you will see bits where it's just like, yeah, I can see too far away.
Yep, view distance 10's too much, like.
Yeah, people who, let's just say there are ways to use interesting tools to manipulate the WoW camera for machinima purposes. Although the one that I used was like Dead and Warlords of Draenor, sadly. Yep. But that was one where you could remove that fog. It would always look awful. And the thing that you would need to do to get like good cinematic shots is sit there and essentially artistically tune the fog to be what you want for the shot that you're going to take. Because basically, you know, WoW didn't have a photo mode, so you had to use a third-party tool, which was against terms of service, but yada, 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 a whole big thing. But it was tacitly okay. But that was just like a good example of, yeah, you could immediately remove all those limitations and suddenly completely break the spell, you know? Break the illusion. The SpiderMan one is also just hilarious.
Yeah, that's a weird one. That's a weird one. So basically, they went from left to right in the SpiderMan remaster, in the Ultimate Edition, because by Insomniac's own claims, they needed a facial match who was a lot closer to Yuri Lowenthal, the actual voice actor for Spider-Man. Whenever they were doing like the higher fidelity facial capture and mapping, all that, they're like, yeah, this isn't working quite as well, so we need someone new. Obviously, if you're paying attention, you'll notice it looks a little bit more like current Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man, Tom Holland. People assume this is the reason. Apparently, it's not, but at the same time, you kind of go, oh, well, you know, that would be a bonus thrown in when getting a new facial match. But then the point is that in ways it's very small, very minor, it completely throws off the game. Because for a start, you look and you see the difference in facial animations, and it's not like as awful as the Final Fantasy X HD stuff, but you can still kind of see, well, you could prefer one or the other, and I think people would lean towards the older version.
Yes.
Because the older version was the one that was done with full intentionality.
Yeah, and this is a video, so it won't come off as good to you in this like screen recording, but yeah, you can tell.
Yeah, but then there's the other part, which is like they get looking like Tom Holland as a bonus, that has a bonus counter effect, which is he looks a lot younger. But that completely doesn't match up with the actual like point of the game, where that Peter Parker, that Spider-Man, is intentionally older. He's intentionally like in his like mid-30s, I think, or something along those lines, or maybe just like early 30s.
Whoa.
Because it's supposed to be, I've been doing this, maybe late 20s, but it's not like I've been doing this for many years. I have been Spider-Man for so long. I'm a master at this. Things go a little bit wrong, and it's about like, and then because then it leads into the Miles Morales story, where he's like, oh yeah, I kind of, I need an apprentice to keep up now. And Miles appears on the scene, and it's very much, yeah, I'm the older brother figure. But then people go, well, why does the Miles look older than the person who's his older brother figure? And you go, yeah, well, that's one of the things that's how that the minor things that worked, all the things that clicked in the original
Peter Parker's
context.
23 years old.
23 years old. So he's not that old, but he's old.
He's different from mid-30s.
Yeah.
Though, funny enough, you, I suppose, accidentally did pull a Sam Raimi.
A little bit,
if you go back and watch that, you're like, Tobey Maguire, what? You're too old. You don't...
Yeah.
It looks insane.
Yeah, maybe that's just me, my own age kind of coming into it. But he's not 16, he's not 17, he's not high school, he's a college graduate. And that's a little bit more experienced comparatively. And that was all within the original context. So every decision they made in that game was, he's supposed to be this age, he's supposed to be like this. And that matched up with how he looks. But it doesn't match up as well in the remaster. And that's a really small thing. You might think I'm completely nitpicking. But it's like, that's where the heart and soul of a lot of these things come together in the end. Is those little like bows on top that really make things fit perfectly to you. And don't have that like kind of, well, it doesn't really make sense running around the back of your head. And it all just comes down to is like, why then do remasters happen if it's like this? And so much of the time it's just because publishers want a version on existing consoles. They want it on the generation so people can go buy it and then get excited for next product.
Yes.
Which is very much what, Nintendo did a fantastic job with the Metroid Prime remaster. But you could also look at it cynically and go, yeah, well, re-release Metroid Prime. Everyone goes, that game's fantastic. Absolutely, thank you. And then they say, by the way, buy Metroid Prime 4. Which is the new one, which is a riskier move because it's not the one you know, not the familiar one that's got like good reviews. So it is just like, sometimes they just went, well, what can we do to make this a product? What can we put in the back of the box? oh, it's a lighting upgrade. It's like, well, yeah, but
it's the sort of thing, like, for me as a consumer, I mean, say Bloodborne.
yeah.
Like, if there had have been a Bloodborne remaster, even though that was a relatively recent game, I'd be thinking to myself, oh, so I can play Bloodborne on a console that can actually run it, at 60 FPS.
That has value,
and it will have frame timing issues not be there anymore. Wahoo. Fantastic. So I actually do think that there's a significant value in moving your game to the newer platform.
There definitely is, yeah.
It's just, you have to do it right.
Yeah,
now,
because
in fairness, I would doubt that The Last of Us Part 1 remaster is going... I very much doubt that's a demaster.
no, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I cannot imagine that whatsoever. I think what we're more saying is, if you're going to pull that move, you need to put the resources in and actually make it really earn its place on that new platform. So it's the sort of thing where if it feels like a few small tweaks and throwing some DLC in and having an overcomplicated upgrade path, like with the Outer Worlds situation, then to people it doesn't feel as good. And then certainly if you're on PC, where you could have got the Outer Worlds anyway, it looks silly and it does not have a good Steam rating, even though, in fairness, the environmental lighting is pretty sweet.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the Bloodborne one is that's because Demon Souls is a good precedent where they maintained that game the way it was, but like they kept the original game layer and then updated the like visual representation of it to the graphics engine, and that kept the spirit. And Bluepoint did a fantastic job there as far as anyone's concerned. So you wouldn't have that worry for Bloodborne, but if it was, say, Private Division were doing that, or someone else who wasn't EA or Capcom or Bluepoint or Nintendo, I suppose, you would just go, oh well, how are you going to ruin this? Oh, what are you doing to Bloodborne to make it more fit the Elden Ring audience? Because maybe it doesn't really work there because you've got those like things there. But what most people want is Bloodborne the way God intended. Bloodborne as made by developers at that time. That snapshot in history transported to now, but technically improved and experientially improved.
Yeah, you want
not literally.
You want the Demon Souls treatment.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you want the Demon Souls treatment, and you don't want them to fiddle with it because what they made at the time was basically perfect.
Yeah, and the Demon Souls treatment as well, like, that sold really well. That was enough to be a strong, almost launch tentpole. Now, of course, that was because it was, I don't know,
games.
it was like the hip indie album before the band went mainstream. I don't want to say mainstream. Oh, Dark Souls, mainstream trash.
Before it
went big.
Yeah.
Just I remember hearing about Demon Souls at the same time that fucking Total Biscuit was recommending playing The Witcher 1 through all of its jank. Obviously those franchises that went and got popular.
Yeah.
But overall, I think the point here is just really with EA and Dead Space and with Capcom. And I suppose if we're going to include the two of them, I think a little bit of Naughty Dog may only be right, even though they've ended up having some things not feel as good with The Last of Us Part 1. It's a bit of a tricky thing. Obviously, The Last of Us Part 1 it does feel a bit more needless because it does have its PS4 version. That being said, the PS5 version does look it does look up there with Part 2. But then I suppose it actually just comes down to a thing of pricing, where let's just say somebody's not played The Last of Us, but they hear it's really good. Maybe they just hear about, the TV show, right? And they like the TV show, they want to try out the game. It's probably good that the best possible version of that story is now something they can pick up on a PS5. The problem then is, or not the problem, but the odd thing is when that's also simultaneously marketed to people who like the first game and maybe already own 2 editions of it. And then for them, it starts to feel quite bizarre. And I think that is the bizarre thing that Sony ended up having happen. I suppose the ideal way to do that, it would almost be like with The Witcher. Remember The Witcher 2 Enhanced Edition?
Yeah.
Where, The Witcher 2 did pretty damn well. I think they brought it onto consoles, they did a whole bunch more work, and then they gave the Enhanced Edition as a free update in PC. Now, I would not expect Sony to be doing that as a free update, obviously, and that's almost rightly so. There's a lot of real hard work went into making The Last of Us Part 1, remastered, or whatever they've ended up calling it, but maybe some sort of discount for people who already have it in their accounts.
Yeah.
That would have been the way to make that feel okay. And look, they could have just went for $40 and then try to get it for new new people to the franchise. So I think really that thing with The Last of Us, it feels egregious, but I think it feels egregious because of how they launched it to people in a way that did not recognize those who already had the game.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously going to be one of the reasons where it's like, what's the logic here? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, I think it's the level of similarity to the prior version. Yeah. Whereas with Resident Evil, nobody's expecting like, hey, I own Resi 2. Where's my discount? Yeah, because that would just make no sense considering the complete difference.
Yeah, never mind. Like, I mean, it's still Capcom. But like the sheer difference, and that's the thing where it comes into like the amount of like the developers work as well, because you go, okay, it wasn't the original Resident Evil 2 team who made the remake, so it's like they actually they made a whole new game, so obviously they deserve the money, etc. But Last of Us, it feels a little bit like same game, which I think is that would be fine if they didn't charge for it as much, basically, because it's like at least it is the same game actually upgraded. But I think there's so many examples of it going wrong that I think people are largely letting them slide individually, but I think if you look at all of the ones that are happening together, it's starting to look really bad for like the history of video games. And to me, I'm coming from the very perspective of I would very much like older games and the more interesting games, more niche games to stay alive and have that like legacy be available without being through emulation. Emulation's fine, it's great, and I use it all the time, but you don't want that answer. You want to have the better answer.
Yeah.
You want to have, you can play this now in a modern form. It's the best version for users. But because I think the Chrono Cross thing is interesting, where they remastered Chrono Cross and everyone went, oh hell yeah, fantastic, and then it ran worse than it did in the PS1, and everyone went, sorry, how did you do that?
That's an achievement.
Yeah, now since they've actually fixed that, they've actually updated that many months later. But whenever they were talked about why remaster this and not Chrono Trigger, which was already ported like 4 times and technically remastered and all sorts of crazy stuff, they actually had what I say is the good answer, the right answer, which was Chrono Cross was going to be unplayable because the PS3 you could play PS1 games, but PS4 they didn't know if you could have that, which was a good call on their part. Mm-hmm. So they decided to set up the project because they wanted Chrono Cross to be playable. And the same way Chrono Trigger is now. They went, okay, we'll do this. We'll do this for preservation, and then they kind of scuffed it up, which means it ultimately comes to the point of, is it preservation or profit? What's the goal? What's the point here? And the answer is both. The answer should be both. But a lot of the time it goes one way or the other, and it's really unfortunate.
Was it Embracer Group?
Embracer Group set up the archive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a bit weird because ultimately, for things to happen, work needs to be done. Now, that can be fine if it's a fan project or whatever. Mm. But also, and there's so many amazing fan projects that are like in this realm, but like you do need to make money. So what you need to do is, it's a problem of alignment. You need to be able to align profit with preservation. Mm. Now, the sad thing there is that just does mean there's a lot of games it'll never make sense to put that massive amount of work into. And I guess that's where passion-driven community doing it for themselves comes in. Yeah. But I think the problem is like preservation versus profit. That should have really, really hurt what Take-Two did with the
GTA.
GTA. And that's the thing that's weird to me, right? Because those GTA games, they could have received a Resi 2 style.
They could have, yeah.
Like they could have done that, or maybe an FF7 remake style thing, and they would have sold at full price. They didn't need to be a trilogy. They would have at full price sold absolute madness.
Sure would have, yeah.
So it's one of those strange things. Like, what is the bar that we set? But I guess ultimately my point is, if there is a way that the profit motive, or even just the paying people's wages motive, if that can line up with actual good quality, both preservation and I suppose this giving people like an enhanced experience. Yeah. Because ultimately with the whole remaster thing, I mean, let's just say there's an Okami remastered. Mm-hmm. But like full like Capcom tier Okami remastered.
That'll be gorgeous. That'll be gorgeous. Yeah.
Would that not be perfect, right? So there are so many game experiences where you would be dying to show it to your friends, but sometimes just the way that it is with a lot of older games, it can be harder for people to start. Maybe some things don't make it as much sense, whatever. So I think just the idea of having like many of the greatest hits still like going strong, being carried forward, yes, and being sold. Like, I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah.
I just want the bar to be a bit better.
That's
the thing.
yeah, that's
like,
it.
I
Yeah.
remember seeing the Ezio trilogy. I really like those games. I mean, obviously they were like a main feature of the Christmas break for so many people. But I know that like the Ezio trilogy thing's not pretty. It's not really a good remaster.
Does
Messes up the lighting and a bunch of things.
Yeah.
So
Does it replace emulation as the way to play those games?
probably not.
Then what's the point?
Yeah.
How are you supposed to get profit?
That's the weird thing, and it seems like for a while we had that era of just like, oh, we've ported it onto the new thing, and there's a higher resolution, and that's it.
Oh, that was better.
It seems like we're in this weird era of trying, but really it's not enough, and it's like, yeah, enhanced lighting as a marketing beat. Maybe what they can't do a marketing beat for same emotional experience enhanced with new artistic techniques, because that's probably what people would want.
Definitely.
Unless, of course, you're going for, I mean, right, 343 have had issues. Master Chief Collection has had issues. But one thing that is pretty damn cool about the Master Chief Collection is how, in at least the first two games, in real time, you can swap the graphics from old to new.
Yeah, I mean that's
Like,
one of the things you do that and everyone's happy. Like,
that's above and beyond.
yeah,
That's so cool. So it's bizarre. I mean, even if I was to think about, like, now that we've released the Pale Beyond, am I immediately thinking, now we could do the Pale Beyond remastered next year? Mwahaha.
Fantastic.
But in a way, based on community feedback, and, you know, once there's a difference between something being play tested by like under 100 people and then people, or, you know, say 15,000 people or plus playing a game, you learn a lot more when far more people play it. So do we have a desire to like go and do some general in-goodening of it?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
see,
But obviously the point there is like, yeah, in-goodening, and the way that we make money via the in-goodening is that now the game is better and appeals to more people, so new people buy it, and people who already have the game, obviously they get some sort of free upgrade or whatever, or maybe it comes in the form of a patch, and maybe they have a good enough experience and they feel like their purchase has been valued enough that they go and tell somebody else.
yeah, see, I know this is a loaded statement.
Oh boy.
And I know The Pale Beyond is a game that's very focused on narrative a lot of the time and choices and stuff, so it doesn't really apply. But there used to be a thing for that back in the day, right? When you made a game and then you released it, you went, we can maybe do something better. It's called making a sequel. That's what they used to do. They used to go, oh yeah, we released that. We could try better. Here's Devil May Cry 2. Here's Devil May Cry 3. It's fine. And then that's how things go forward, as opposed to being stuck in the loop of the same thing over and over again. I think that's where people get a little bit annoyed, where it is thinking from that perspective of, obviously you can patch a game, you can remaster, fine. But the people are like, yeah, that was good. Can we have the better one now? Not the same thing, slightly tweaked.
I guess that's, and this totally takes us off topic.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, you're probably used to at this stage. That reminds me of a similar thing that I always just feel. And it's like, can I have a bloody expansion pack, please?
Oh, please, yes, absolutely.
Do you remember the days of getting an expansion pack for a game?
Frozen Throne with some crack, I tell you.
And do you know what I'm beginning to realize?
Yeah.
Now I think we're actually on average about the same age as our audience, or slightly younger.
Close.
But certainly if someone's watching this and they're like, say, under 22 or something, they may have actually mostly missed out on expansion packs.
Outside of like World of Warcraft or MMOs,
Yeah.
basically, yeah.
Yeah, outside of MMOs, because like it used to just be, here's a PC game, comes in a big box that looks really cool with a manual full of lore. Expansion pack comes out next year. You get even more of the thing that you liked.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I guess the fun thing there is there's actually a very specific game that kind of crossed the line between expansion pack and DLC. Because obviously DLC and season passes are the same thing, but repackaged in a way that feels ultimately worse a lot of the time. And it was The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion.
Oh, yes.
Because Shivering Isles and the other one were very much, I can't remember, was it Knights of the Nine?
Knights of the Nine.
Yeah, they were expansion packs, but they also kind of DLC.
Shivering Isles was like the proper true scale one.
Yeah,
least.
that was an expansion pack, and then Knights of the Nine was like a smaller one, the kind of DLC. But they were at the time of DLC becoming a thing. So they were like what crossed the barrier over. But they had that same like, oh, here's the game. You get this massive reason to revisit the game. Sometimes even replay it with like a different perspective or a different build to try something new or something interesting. Here's a reason to play it again with a load of new extra content. And that was beautiful. And they try to kind of do that a little bit with like live services and patches, but it's not the same.
Well, do you know what's reminded me of? And it's the one thing that proves it the most. Battlefield 1, where you would have sort of expansion, map pack DLC things, right? And it meant that by the end, Battlefield 1, you know what? I'm going to do it live, everybody, right? So, Battlefield 1 DLC.
Oh dear.
Okay. Basically, it ended up Battlefield 1, when it was running in that older model, had an absolutely absurd number of maps. Yeah, so you had They Shall Not Pass, In the Name of the Tsar, Turning Tides, and Apocalypse. And each one of those has, like, 5 maps? It was crazy. They just had so much content. And then you compare it to what 5 got. And it's an absolute trickle. Because it moves over to the live service model. So it's kind of interesting in the way that just all of these trends kind of go, and I guess how much so many of us want. We want the old.
Remember when things were good, but not like completely ironically said? There's a lot of people go, oh yeah, back in the but this is like literally the framing of things back then was literally a little bit more consumer friendly, and it wasn't loaded with all of this like I guess the profiteering that feels like it's kind of under the core of everything that's being done.
Yeah. It's a final comparison, and this is actually on topic. Compare StarCraft 1 Remastered and Warcraft 3 Remastered. Now, this is a fascinating one because in both of those, the assets were made by Lemon Sky. The same people, right? Made the actual assets. Now, you look at StarCraft 1 Remastered, and it will remind you a lot more of Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition. Yeah. Now, for AoE 2 Definitive, they did do quite a lot more. They even started to make new content in the spirit of that game, continuing balance tweaks and stuff like that to like help foster the competitive community. I actually think that like as a gold standard, we've talked about what do you want? Like, do you want a Capcom remake, or do you want it like teleported to the modern? And if what you want is the latter, I actually think that Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition is... Because Age of Empires 2 HD was good, and it kind of did what it said in the tin. It just meant, hey, you can play it now. Great. But you look at Definitive Edition, it is, the new sprites, etc., etc., etc. Really good quality. Really good. And that is just the gold standard.
Yeah, I think that's...
But we end up getting the half-ass most of the time. I suppose that's like the main thing of the video. It's just we've noticed it's still happening.
Demakes and demasters, fantastic.
Yeah, we've noticed it's still happening. And I think the Outer Worlds one, just with how reamed that's been online, I think it's worth talking about, but also just in a way that like humanizes the actual developers who are making these, because a lot of the times like the person who is doing a lot of the engine development for the new lighting system or whatever, like it's not their job. It's their job to make the tools, not necessarily use the tools. Now, obviously they'll be making those tools to the spec of the people who will be using the tools. There will be artistic collaboration there. I think a lot of the time people have a very, narrow view of creativity. It's like, no, being an engine engineer is an extremely creative job. Look at the shit that they have to do. It's insane. But ultimately, it's a thing of like, yeah, people have tried their hardest, but likely because of time frame. Like, think about maybe the amount of scenes that you would need to process. That's going to be very different from like making a game to a quicker turnaround, like a quicker turnaround project.
Yeah, they're not interested in doing a full comb through with all of that additional like effort required. They're interested in doing it quickly and getting it out the door for profit, of course, but also to have something, maybe it's like, hey, we're going to, like with Naughty Dog throwing their like devs who weren't currently on a product or a project onto that project for Last of Us Remake, and that worked okay in the end, roughly. But it's the same idea of like, it's that, but that's a good idea, but is it best for the end user? Seemingly not, which has me at the part where I'm thinking there's 3 ways to do it. You can Capcom it, you can Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition it, or you can just port it. I think at this point, if you port it and release it cheap, you'll do a better job. I think people will be happier with that, because it's about like framing, right? Where everyone expects a remaster now. But I think if like platform holders did the work to set up, okay, right, so you can play, because I know obviously the Xbox has a good backwards compatibility, has like the FPS boost and stuff like that sometimes, but I think if the framing was there on all platforms of, here's the old game, you can play it like, hang on, Nintendo were literally doing that through Nintendo Switch Online, actually. So yeah, Nintendo were doing it basically perfectly with Metroid Prime, and also with their just, here's the old game, play it, and it would obviously, you can't buy them, but you play them for reasonably cheap in the Switch Online. So it is like, that's the framing we need people to start to like actually deal with, is here's the old game the way it was. It's very good, by the way. Please play it. You don't need a remaster that's kind of fickle. You either go above and beyond, do it right, or don't do it at all. Pick the 3. Don't attempt a restoration. like we had at the top of this video, because that's ultimately what I think, that's what I'm terrified of. And a lot of it is me looking at Final Fantasy X and going, yeah, you're right. The one I played when I was a kid, the PS2 was way better looking. Damn it. What have you done? God,
Yeah. Okay, well, let's not break your heart anymore with FF10. That's basically it. That's the situation. I think it's an overall pretty fascinating topic. You could even look at, say, how the art style of WoW changed with when they made the new character models.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing. Did it feel like it kind of informed some other things being different in the game? Yeah, kind of. So a lot of this is very interesting from the artistic perspective. Ultimately, though, whenever it moves into the territory of feeling like we could do this and it would make money, but that's not being met with like, yeah, okay, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this absolutely fantastically and make people be delighted that they get to play the Outer Worlds again in our new version. If you're not going to do the job right, don't do it at all. Otherwise, to consumers, it feels like it's a cash grab. It feels like it's lazy, even though it probably isn't lazy. It's probably a case of developers not being given the time and the resources that they would actually need, and all that stuff just feels bad. And that's not what game, even though, you wouldn't think it looking at the internet, but that's actually not what games are for. So there you go. I suppose my final thing would just be, hey, go play Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition. It fucking slaps. Same for StarCraft 1 Remastered.
Yep, absolutely. And emulate everything else.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, hell, even Diablo 2 Resurrected is pretty fucking good.
Yeah.
So, there are examples of doing it right. And maybe D2 Resurrected helped get that franchise back a little bit.
Maybe.
That just goes to show, like, yeah, okay, do it properly. Tony Hawk, another example. Do it properly. There will be a great reward. And then don't do 3 and 4 remastered. So between 3 and 4 remastered and Final Fantasy, I think Matt's just going to be heartbroken for the rest of the day. So I suppose on that, farewell. Let us know what your favorite and most disappointing remasters have been.